59. You're all very welcome. Nice to see familiar faces joining us and new faces as well. Just look over into the chat. You can join us in the chat. Tell us where you're joining us from, what the weather's like there today. I'm joining you from sunny Dublin. It's a beautiful afternoon. I've just come in from the garden and we are very lucky to have with us today Denise Hampson. So as you all start to join us, we welcome you to put on your cameras so that we can see your lovely faces as well. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about our guest today, Denise, who is a behavioural economics and experience design consultant. She's spoken at TEDx. She's spoken in the UK House of Lords. I was very impressed by that, Denise. Between 1999 and 2004, she was a member of the GB track cycling team and is the British 200-metre sprint record holder. Prior to her athletic career, Denise was a systems engineer specialising in human system interaction and cockpit design, creating systems and services best matched to real human behaviour. But today we've invited Denise along to talk about her new book, Desire Code. It's this beautiful cover, and I'm going to open it up because it's an unusual design in relation to our usual books we look at in that. Let's open a lovely page. It's colour pictures all the way through, and actually, as opposed to the sort of more academic books we might have looked at, this is something that you can actually open up at any section and gain insight from any page. And when I met Denise in the week, we were chatting about how it came about to be designed like this. So Denise, you're very welcome. And maybe you'd like to tell the members how the design of your book came about.
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you so much, Louise, for the intro. Yeah, the book actually, weirdly, it started out as course notes, so it's a bit of a convoluted story. I don't want to sort of run the meeting down with the story, but I can give you the essence of it. Was essentially I was doing some work in and around behaviour change in public health, certainly in the leisure sector, trying to get people more physically active. And in about 2008, I came across the Predictably Irrational book. And it was kind of my first introduction to behavioural economics, and it really blew my mind. I remember I'd been in lots of calls and discussions about how we get people to change behaviour. I was talking to lots of people who run things like stop smoking services, accident prevention, childhood safety, as I mentioned, tobacco control, services for older people, leisure services, swimming lessons, etc. And I was in that kind of space, and I kind of came up with, I read this book and I said, folks, like, forget everything you've learned. There is all this insight about the gap between knowing stuff and doing stuff. And I started delivering these workshops to people, and I would be like, guys, I learned something new. If you knew this about, and if you were going to think about the way that you did your work in this kind of way, in what way would you make it different? And weirdly, it just kind of started a chain reaction. And I ended up doing this training all up and down the UK for a couple of years. But as you know, we had a global recession in 2008, and it really hit the public sector. A lot of my customers at the time being in the NHS. And I was freelance at this point. They were starting to lose their budgets. Their staff were having budget cuts. There was a lot of redundancies. And people were saying to me, look, Denise, we think this is important, but we don't have budget for the kind of training that you do. How about we get everyone together in a room and we put on the session. We'll put coffee in the corner, and maybe you can do something for all of us. But by the way, make it half a day because we just don't have time. I remember thinking, how do I condense all this into half a day? And I realized I had to kind of codify it in some way, just so that I could give people enough of a framework to get curious and interested, but not that I would kind of go in deep on anything. And my original version of this, which started in about 2011, was called Cracking the Desire Code. And I realized of all the examples that I'd read, of all the behavioral insights, kind of topics and biases and heuristics, there seemed to be this emerging theme for me that was usable by the people I worked with. And that was the 5 themes which I created at the time, which obviously persist still in the book, are the emotional resonance of messages. So I spent a lot of time with health services in particular, who were busy like beating up people up with data. You know, if you don't do your 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per week, you know, you're going to increase your chances of becoming, you know, type 2 diabetic by X amount % in so many years. And it was like, it was way too many layers of numbers. So that kind of emotional resonance and emotional decision making. Another one was a lot of decisions around short-termism and things that people want to, people wanting to, you know, reap the benefits of their efforts sooner rather than later, the kind of the big hyperbolic discount, but all those things that go around that are time distortion, our lack of understanding of how time passes, and the acceleration that we have of our sort of nowism instinct, because we've got mobile phones that are connected to the internet that allow us to answer questions in a heartbeat. And the third one was around our terrible understanding of risk, our perception of things being more likely if they're more recent or more visceral or more novel, how we still play the national lottery, how my favorite example in the bit about how people prefer to know what they're going to get is the people who've played the lottery since the beginning, and they know they're really not going to win, but they're scared of stopping just in case, because they believe that like fate's going to give them this warped hand, and that it's going to be the Wednesday after they stop playing the lottery will be the day that, you know, and they're terrified of this idea of how they're going to cope for the rest of their lives, knowing that they should have won money that they don't have, which is just the most irrational of all of our behavior. The idea that people look for, they're drawn towards things they think will make them look good in front of the eyes of others. So a lot of our social instincts fell into the 4th category, which is about positivity. Nobody wants to be beaten into doing something, you know, for fear of a worse evil. You know, they prefer to want to do something for positive reasons. And then finally, because I'm a service designer, an experienced designer at heart, it's this idea that you can do all those other things, make something super desirable, and then still make it really hard for people to get. So yeah, Cracking the Desire Code was a simplified 3-hour whistle-stop tour of 5 themes. And I really just wanted people to get curious. You can only touch the surface in such a short time. And what I found was in those sessions that people were just furiously writing notes, and I wanted them to engage, and I wanted them to think of ideas of how they could use some of the discussions we were having in their work. And I came away with this idea that I needed to produce notes that was kind of like, you know, eating its own breakfast sort of thing. It was like, it has to be desirable. It has to be upbeat and positive and interesting and catch attention. And it has to be something that people want to keep. So I produced, and I have a copy here. I produced this pack, which looks very, very similar to the book, although square instead of circles. And it was just a set of booklets essentially with each of the 5 themes. It was just a quick 20-page booklet, and you'll see the style is very similar to the style that I have in the book. And I just got the biggest buzz because people, they've got that kind of velvet lamination finish, so people would like, you'd see them, you know, really handling it carefully and stroking the booklets. And they looked after them and they kept them, instead of finding a pile of the notes and the handouts that you had kind of in the waste bin on the way out. People were still having these on their desks like months or even years later. And really, since I produced these in 2014, so it was quite a leap from the original course to these. And ever since, I've just been collecting more and more case studies. And I now see the world through these 5 themes, which is in some ways a blessing. In some ways, it's really unfortunate because I bore the pants off my friends and my family about it. But people kept saying, you want to turn that into a book. And many New Year's resolutions later and lockdown number 2 later, I decided maybe now was the time to get it done. So yeah, that's really how it came about, and how the 5 themes came about. And really, I wouldn't have been pushed into trying to codify it and simplify it if it wasn't for the way that my training had to change all those years ago.
A really great story, Denise, thanks. And I think in this case, the fact that the book has been built of a practical experience of it being, it reassures you as the reader that obviously this does work because it's been used in practice already. Yeah. And a lot of the book is quite funny in that the way you sort of call companies or governments or call people out, as it were, for some of the nonsense that goes on and the way they communicate messages. And this really made me laugh towards the end about the way that industries generate their own unique language. I mean, we've all been there, haven't we, with, business speak, and you come out the meeting and you just think, I don't really even know what they were talking about. What are all these lingo words? And why can we not all just speak the same language? But it's also the type of book that I think somebody could sort of stumble across and almost not realize that they're learning behavioral science tools or behavioral economics terms. So it's very, seems ironic to be saying it like this, but it is very user-friendly, isn't it, Denise?
Yeah, designed deliberately that way. The bit you picked on about the insider language, my thinking in that space in particular was triggered by a conversation with somebody, I think it was from Bolton NHS, doing some work with them. And I asked people in the room to describe what it is that they do. I mean, I find it hard myself, but in health in particular, there's lots of kind of dilute language of, oh, we help people who do this, and we try to, and this woman said, she goes, I'm a volunteer walk leader coordinator. And she goes, don't get me wrong, I don't volunteer, I coordinate the volunteer walk leaders. And I said, is there any way you can simplify what it is that you do and describe it in something a little bit more kind of ordinary and short? And we cut around it for ages. And I said, well, when you talk to small children or when you talk to your grandparents, what do you say? And she goes, oh, I had this conversation with my granddad. And he goes, oh, you take people for a walk, do you? And she said, I didn't know whether I should feel a little bit insulted or actually whether he just nailed it. It was just, again, it was one of those conversations that just highlights, how much jargon and stuff that really doesn't make sense to outsiders. And we pass it on to people and we expect them to know what we mean. And another example you give along those same lines then, talking about this lack of communication, Denise, is fairly towards the back of the book, and you say, if you have to create a user manual so customers can use your product, you've already made it too hard for them. And something that really caught my eye, I've never heard of this, but talking about showers, and somewhere in here you say something about something that had a gap in, oh yes, the hotel in Manchester, all guest bathrooms have a hole in the shower enclosure so guests can reach the shower controls. Because absolutely right, you have someone to stay at your house and it seems like the first thing you have to say, right, now this is how the shower works. And you're like, Jesus, it's a shower, how complicated can it be? But often they are. I've been to stay in so many Airbnbs and had to come and get help with trying to work out how the shower works. I know, and they're really quite simple. In the main, they're temperature and on off pretty much, or I don't know anyone who likes to have the shower on weak, so let's just assume it's an on off. But yeah, every hotel I go to, I have to figure out the shower, and you're right, when visitors stay, that's the first thing. Let's show you how this works, and all the quirks as well. Oh, it doesn't get warm instantly, by the way, you have to turn it just beyond or there's this click, and then it's and the Hotel Brooklyn it is in Manchester. I mean, it sounds a bit odd and very wrong actually to say there's a hole in the shower, but literally right next to the sink, there's the big wall of the kind of like the glass of the shower unit, and there is literally like a little oval cutout, and you can just reach in and turn the shower on. The number of hotels I've been in where not only you're trying to figure it out, but you're trying not to get doused in freezing cold water as well at the same time. So you're kind of tentatively like leaning in and lurching out of the the shower before you get soaked with cold water. Yeah, and it's such a simple thing, small detail.
Poor product design is so frustrating, and yet we tolerate. I had just bought really quickly. I bought this new nozzle to go on the end of my hose, and I put it on today, and you do this some kind of twist, and then you do some kind of push, and then it's a jet, and then I'm thinking, Jesus, it's the end of a hose. How complicated can it be? I actually can't work out how to work it. I pulled the end off and I'm just going out with the end of my hose again, like I did before, with my thumb over the end. So it can be very frustrating. And I think we tolerate I think other things you sort of highlight is like website design. We'll tolerate things with so many clicks, and then in the end you're just like, oh sure, I'm just going to sign out because it gets so flipping frustrating. So I'm going to that's my rant for the morning. I'm going to hand over to Prakash now to ask a couple of questions, and then we'll be opening it up to the members. Great to see you all join us. So get your questions in, and we'll come to those in a minute.
Great. Cool. Prakash.
Thank you so much, Louise. By the way, I can see a couple of folks have joined us, I think, for the first time, or maybe it's their second time. There's Punita, there is Purni, there is Palashi. I can see Malika, and then there is Kirtana, there's Karen. I think Karen has been here before too, right? Hina too, Elaine Puma. So Dominic, and in case you are wondering what is the format out here, the format is quite simple. We all put our cameras on. We go down to a gallery view on the Zoom screen so that we can see all of us, including our guest here, Denise. Another 5 or 7, 8 minutes, we're going to open it up for Q&As, right? Your questions, which you can start typing on the chat box. Louise is going to moderate the Q&A session so that Denise can focus purely on the answer, but Alice doesn't have the stress of figuring out which question do I pick up, right? That's our format. It's very informal. And it's a club. We're supposed to become friends with each other. So if you're here for the first or second time, please start figuring out people around you, share your LinkedIn IDs and become friends, right? All right. Denise, you've had a fantastic career, and you have been an engineer before. You've been an athlete, and then you've been a UX, experienced consultant, and now you're an author, right? So these previous experiences of yours from the world of cycling, sprinting, and engineering, how is it carried on to your current role in the form of a behavioral science, behavioral economics experiences and consultant? How does that experience translate, or you see them as totally separate chapters in your life?
They all. I fell into each of them really in a way. I mean, I spent my whole teens wanting to be a vet, and then finally I found this degree at Loughborough University, systems engineering, which was multidisciplinary, and there was just something about it that caught my attention. And in a very short space of time, I suddenly ditched my idea of being a vet and decided to become an engineer. And the bit of my degree that I really liked the most was the human factors, human computer interaction, the designing the bit for people. I just found it fascinating. And I was lucky to be sponsored by British Aerospace, is now BAE Systems. And in my placements I did a year with them as well. I was placed into cockpit groups and crew systems type roles. I remember my first piece of work on Eurofighter Typhoon was in the cockpit environment. It was actually, we were doing an assessment on the ejector seat. So it's a bit like messing with the settings in your car, moving the seat back and forward, making sure you could still reach the dials. And I had to recruit lots of, I suppose, fellow sort of student and graduate colleagues who could dress up like aircrew for like the afternoon and, become our subjects in our experiments. The funniest thing was noticing how when they put all the aircrew gear on, the swagger changed and they enjoyed like walking around the site in all the gear. I did a bit of work on Nimrod, which actually never went into final production. What was interesting at aerospace, back in the 70s, this is how good human factors engineering was at the time. When new aircrew joined the Air Force, they used to line people up in height order and say, from this point down, you know, you guys are small enough to fly fast jets. So they were in the Hawks and the Jaguars, because they were just little enough to fit. And if you're too tall, you ended up in the Nimrod and the other planes. So I ended up doing a lot of work with these kind of retired aircrew, but they were all giants of people. They were really tall, big guys. And they used to tell me stories about how they used to fly, and they'd say, well, you know, one would look after the workstation of another. They'd pull some equipment out and use it for temporary, like, curry storage. Someone would go and make the, you know, the food, and they'd be teetering around with makeshift trays. They had sonobuoy launchers, so basically microphones that go in the water to listen for submarines, or listen out for, I guess, whatever they listen for out in the ocean. And it's a two-man operation because it's dangerous, and they have to drop these things out of the plane. And he said, but what we worked out was we could get the light switch from this workstation here. If we stretched it, we could like wrap it around the bit that's like is the kind of like the safety trigger for the sonobuoy launcher. So people were free to do more things, and people could make dinner, and then this person could. And I was just so interested and fascinated by all like this counter behavior. And like, this has been designed, and you know, these people have no lack of training, but they still did stuff their own way, and they sabotaged everyone's best intentions. And I was really interested in that gap. But you're right, I was also a cyclist at the time. And at the point I was, you know, deciding on like my graduate career, I had an opportunity to pretend I was still a student and live on a grant and be told what to wear and what to eat and where to go, and ride some very, very cool bikes and think that I looked like the bee's knees and super aerodynamic helmets. And rather than do the graduate job, I decided to travel the world on my bike, so to speak. Although never actually on my bike, because I was a short distance specialist, so I never really went that far on the road. Just to cafes and back, we were like coffee consumers and cake eaters. So yeah, into sport. Sport is.
Let me jump in here.
Right.
You're talking about sports here, right? And one of the things a lot of us are struggling right now with, given the lockdown and the pandemic, is the health aspect of it. So we all are pretty much aware we are tied down to our chairs. So there is a good amount of us who have made some sort of resolution around fitness. And we also made them in January, you know, when the New Year's were there. So as someone who has been a professional athlete right out there, what would you tell us, most of us who struggle with this whole routine? You know, it's something you need to do regularly, every day, every other day, and you have done this at peak levels, right? So with that insight, as the insight of someone who understands human behavior and designing systems, right? What happens? Why do we keep on falling back to the same routine, and we kind of are, you know, not doing our best? What is the difference between you and us?
Yeah, very little is the actual answer. And what was interesting, actually, if I skip the sport bit, when I retired from sport, I again accidentally fell into, I did some work with my local leisure team, and I was, at the time, I'd put my Wales tracksuit on and go to primary schools and talk to them about what I had for breakfast. And actually a lot of people would say to me, it's easy for you. It's so easy for you. You must be so motivated. Like, you have no idea what it's like for us, kind of, I don't know, like regular people who aren't professional sports people. And the truth is that there's very little difference between them and us. And to be honest, it became my habit and it became my day job. In fact, in the end, I probably didn't even enjoy it all that much. But staying fit became my routine, and training became my routine. But I've had to work hard at staying active and keeping my fitness. But it was interesting, people's perception is that it would be so easy. But let me go on to the next part of your question. This is actually where some of the behavioural science comes in, and that is that we tend to we make big declarations about either how excited we are about the prospect of a goal, or if we're expressing frustration about how we feel about ourselves, typically in the evenings when we've expired most of our kind of rational capacity and we're a little bit low on battery power. I think I refer in the book to it as being, we're like unsupervised toddlers. You know, once that kind of rational battery is done, we're susceptible to evening TV and advertising that tells us how terrible we are, and if only we just bought this, you know, this beauty product or booked this trip, that we'd be like the best kind of humans again. I know from work I've done in healthcare that the appetite for apps and behavior change type information, self-care information is strong at night. Stop smoking services that do a thing where they say text quit to this number and we'll get you booked in to meet a stop smoking advisor, get high hits at night. So people have this high dissatisfaction at night. And what they do is they'll say things like, you know, New Year's night, yeah, seconds to midnight. Nobody says this year I'm going to eat more pies and I'm going to sit down longer. They say this year is going to be the best yet. I'm going to run a marathon. I'm going to join a gym. And they set these great goals. And then the next morning they wake up, they've had a recharge, they're feeling a little more rational, a little bit more in control, less dissatisfied with everything, and less motivated because they're literally in a different state of mind. Different bit of the brain's activated right now. So they'll say things like, do you remember last night when I said I was going to run a marathon? Maybe it's like not so important right now. So one of the tricks is actually to be able to capture in as much technicolor as possible those moments when you're feeling hyper motivated. Try to remember as much as you can about it so that you can remind your slightly calmer, more rational self when that happens. Maybe write yourself a note or lock something in, like book a yoga session for 6 a.m. next day, or tell somebody, or send a text to a quit line or something like that. Actually get committed at the time that you're excited.
Then you said you also relied on rituals. I understand, we understand from our studies that a good amount of athletes develop some sort of a ritual to go from a state to a certain state, to put them into the zone. Did you have some sort of a ritual for yourself?
I did. I had odd socks. I had those very small in-shoe socks that you can't see, very, very small socks. And I was just really terribly disorganized with my laundry, and I had like red pairs and yellow pairs for some reason. And then one day I was at a Friday night track league. Somebody pointed out the fact that my socks were odd, and we laughed about it, and I said they were my special race socks, and I raced amazingly that night. And just for giggles, a week later I did the same thing deliberately, and I raced really well again. And then I didn't want to break the spell like athletes don't. They somehow believe that. So I knew what it was. I knew that socks was not the way that made my performance enhanced, so to speak, not that way, but you know what I mean. But I also knew enough about myself and how my brain worked to know that really what I was doing was I was sending a signal to myself to say, it's race night, get your race face on, you know, come on, like you've got to come up for this. And it helped me to prepare. So in the end, that became my routine. Also, before because I was a sprinter and I was on the track, we used to do standing starts. You might have seen it on like the Olympic Games or World Championships, especially in things like the team pursuit. There's always one rider in a gate. It's like a big device that holds the bike in place, and there's a countdown, and the moment that the countdown's done, the brakes open, and if you're not moving, you'll fall, because you know what it's like to be static on a bike. You just fall over. So you have to be ready to go as soon as the gate opens. So we developed a breathing technique and a way of moving the body so that at the moment that the brake released, you're already throwing your weight forward and you're on your way. And even now I can hear the same sound, because it's, I don't know, they haven't changed the equipment in 20 years. So it's on TV, and the Tissot, it's Tissot brand, the Swiss watch brand, do the timing, and they have the same pulse sound. And I catch myself doing the same breathing technique. Like 15 years after I quit, I still do that technique. It happens instinctively and I can't help it.
Fantastic. Yeah. Folks, I've just put down a link to the Desire Code's blog out there. So for people who have not got the book or have no idea about the content of the book, click on the link. It'll give you some articles out there that should give you the idea of the zone of the book, and it can help you formulate questions. Please start sharing your questions because I'm almost done here with the last question, and it's connected to ritual. Because on one side, you have this ritual which you are developing for yourself for performance and control. Second, then there are rituals and norms which develop within sporting teams, within the whole sports itself, companies and groups of people. And I see the doping control signboard behind you, and so how can I not bring up the whole doping scandal in the whole cycling world? And we're talking human behavior, we're talking about systems, we're talking about rituals, and at some point of time, it almost seemed like this became a ritual, very, very embedded in the cycling world. I mean, we know of many high-profile athletes, Lance Armstrong and all. So you have been on both sides of the world, right? You have the perspective of being an athlete, that intense competition. How is that world? You can see as a behavioral scientist too, right? Someone who has in behavioral science. How does a particular ritual or a particular norm develop in situations like this? And I want to also extrapolate it a bit, saying, so is it also then possible to create norms and routines and rituals which can make a company more honest, more innovative, more experimentative? And can it take it down the other path, like the doping scandal and Enron, we know, where people are all fudging numbers? Like, how do you see this?
Yeah.
It's an open-ended last question. Pick it up whichever way you want to do.
I mean, I suppose it's the kind of, it's a cultural question, and it's a question about the kind of culture that people set. And I'd say it's unfortunate in sport in particular. We really celebrate so hard the winners. We turn them into like kind of gladiators and heroes. And you can imagine that people, they become addicted to that sensation, that feeling, that being those things. People who, I quite often say, if you were to put a microphone under the nose of the person who wins the 100 meters at the Olympic Games, they'll probably tell you that the reason that they won is because they believed in themselves and they trained hard. But actually, if they were to ask the person who finished like 6th in the semi-final, they'd probably find the same answers. So there's some a little bit more to it. It's just maybe the person that goes 1/10 of a second faster, or even less, maybe 0.003 of a second faster, is going to be the person who has all the glory, has the amazing house, becomes like their national hero, here's the national anthem. So you can see why the temptation is there when sport is such a winner-takes-all kind of environment. And talking of biases, it's that kind of it's the self-serving bias right there, isn't it? People just say it's for all the reasons that were down to me and myself. And it was definitely none of the luck that I had, or, like the fact that I just happened to not get injured last May, or, that it was the other person that got food poisoning on our last World Cup trip, etc. There's so many factors in it. But so you can see why the culture is set up for doping, in that we have this kind of sensationalism of our superstars. They are superstars. I actually have a different perspective of sport. I mean, it opened so many doors for me. I'm really proud of everything that I did in sport. But I also see it's got a shade side. It's got a dark side, and you see lots of people getting burned out, people lost as to who they are. There's a lot of instances of mental health, drug and alcohol abuse, people who really don't know who they are post-sport. Sport burns a lot of people out too. So if you only look at children looking for football contracts, and there's a lot of pushy parents all over sport as well, which I've seen, and some of those people go on to do amazing things, and some of them just burn out and fall out with their families. So it kind of, sport messes you up a bit, but at the same time it's a fantastic thing. So I probably recognize it for what it is. And yeah, the doping control sign, it's I didn't steal it. My husband also works in anti-doping. So we have loads of really kind of philosophical chats about, that's not how we met, by the way, about athletes and the world of sport, elite sport and doping and so on.
Oh, wow. I had no idea that was a story. All right. Yeah. I mean, what about meeting your husband, that he's on the other side? So you do have some sort of a straight up accountability partner if you were still out, bicycling. So I think this is going to be a question. We're going to have a discussion separately among us in one of the upcoming sessions, saying if it is possible for you to turn the high stress environment look at the higher stress environment and the culture then changes into accepting a certain kind of behavior, can we also create in a different kind of environment, different kind of culture in our organizations, which can prompt our companies, our teams to be more creative, more open, more experimentative, more innovative? Is that possible? I think, Louise, we should have the discussion separately in one of the upcoming sessions. Louise, I want to invite you back in out here because I think we already have some questions out there, fantastic ones. Can you help us pick them up one by one, please?
I can, of course. Thanks very much for staying with us, everybody, and delighted the way the conversation was developing there, Denise. I think that's fascinating. And if any of you have not watched the Tiger Woods documentary talking about young sports people, how they develop, the rise and the fall, can really recommend that. And so interesting that you were talking about these late afternoon behaviours and, you know, the messages that we receive, and then to move on to the doping. I've just been reading an article about shopping addiction written by a psychologist. The rise in shopping in lockdown, of course, is the only way we can access it, but also the problem that becomes with the sort of the dopamine hit of the excitement of the purchase. And so it's really interesting the way the conversation was going. So we've had lots of chat in the side bar. Thanks very much, members. I just want to call out Sunil Krishnan, who tells us he's joining us from Woodford Green, which is where I'm originally from. So hi, Sunil. Delighted you joined us there. And Tony was having a good chat about how we like to have a well-designed book. We like the feel of them, and there's plenty of well-designed books out there. On the same theme, Michael was actually asking there, now let's see if we can find Michael's comment. He was asking, are there any other complementary reads on the topics of experience or service design that you would particularly recommend? He says, for example, he picked up Why We Fail recently by Rosenfield, Flaws in Experience Design, and he'd love to know any recommendations that you would have that you think are particularly good experience or service design books.
Yeah, what I found is the actual service design category is very small. It's a relatively small field. Only a few years ago, I started working on a contract and they said, we think we need your skills, but we're not entirely sure where you fit. And what's a service designer again? And now the same organization has many service designers. So it shows you how quickly that the field has changed. But I don't feel like there's loads of books in this space, which means it's an interesting book to place. There is one book that I like, that I have a copy of, that describes, again, it's called Good Services. I don't know if it's something that you've heard of. It's by an author called Lou Down. And in their book, they describe the work that they've done within government departments in particular, but also just how dysfunctional and how disjointed things are, and how hard it is for customers and users to navigate their way through services, how inaccessible they can be, how people can end up with the thing that they didn't want, like many moons after. And it all resonates with me at the moment. I do a lot of work at the moment within the courts and tribunal service here in the UK. And again, people use the services, they are already having a difficult time because they actually have to use our service. They are making money claims against each other. Maybe they're getting divorced, maybe they're experiencing bereavement, or they're trying to pull together a tribunal against an employer or something like that. So they're already having a really terrible time. And the number of times per day I'll say, wait, they're having a bad time as it is, let's not make it any worse. And it's, government's getting a lot better at it. We've now have service standards and frameworks, and I know that Lou had a hand in actually building those frameworks. So I would recommend Good Services by Lou Down. Really great book. I'd say also very visual, a different type of book to mine, but also one that feels very like you can pick it up, get a gem out of it, and then pop it back down again.
Thank you. Thanks, Denise. Good question, Michael. And it's certainly not the type of book that I think that could become an audible book, because the visual is very important. But Hector was asking, have you got any plan, or have the publishers any plans for releasing a Kindle version?
I've thought about it. I actually don't know enough about Kindle books, so I probably need to find out a bit more. If it will translate, my only fear is because everything in Design Code was very square, so it's a square book. The original was square. The icons even used to be square. And the design template I use, and I don't know if that would work on a Kindle, literally be given that it's a very odd shaped book. And I don't know how well the kind of visual style renders. I mean, it may be that it would work well, but I don't know. You're right about the audiobook. I think it would work in that.
Yeah, I mean, nothing would be lost reading it on a good iPad screen. But I mean, my original Kindle is black and white, so there's absolutely no point really seeing it in that format. So there we are, Hector. That's the feedback there. And go ahead, Denise.
Before the next question, one of the inspirations that I had for the design, as in the kind of the bite-sized bits and the provocative statements, there was a book written by Tom Peters, the author, the US business author, back in 2006, and it was called Reimagine. And I got my hands on a copy of that about that time, and I became a bit of obsessed with his point of view on a lot of things, which is still so current. And I remember that about his book, and also the fact that it was little paragraphs, big pictures, noisy statements, almost like angry statements he had. And I was like, I fully agreed. You know, I wanted to shout back at the book. And I've been in touch with him and, you know, complimented him on his influence on my career. We've actually met in the past as well. So it was an absolute joy that he agreed to endorse my book too. So that's why I managed to get an endorsement from the great man on the cover. Yeah, but it was also based on Reimagine. So if anyone wants to get their hands on a copy of that, I don't think it's in print anymore, but there's still lots of copies in and around the system. You can easily get your hands on one. It's a great book.
Thank you. Thanks, Denise. Great recommendation. Now there's a nice question come in from Naluka. Would you like to ask the question yourself, Naluka?
Yeah, thanks, Louise, and hello, Denise. Really, really interesting. I think the world of experience design in itself is so fascinating, especially when you put the human at the heart of it. So thank you for sharing some of the things you've talked about today. My question was really around thoughts on when you're designing for a product, so an app or what Louise mentioned around her garden hose and the application on that, and the behavioural science considerations there when you are designing for a service, so going to the airport or booking a medical appointment. I'm just curious to know what are some of the behavioural science considerations or differences, and I appreciate it's quite a broad question, but between that product versus service approach.
I mean, the approach that I've taken, so I'm more of a service designer than kind of an industrial product designer. So rather than, and even products would probably be digital products for myself. What I'm interested in is the funnel through the journey. So because it's time-based and people have to go through various steps, even if it's only a couple of steps, I'm most interested in saying, how can we keep people moving through? Because usually the thing that you're investing your money in to get customers to, whether you are a person selling products on a site or whether you are, you know, a stop smoking service for people who are pregnant, then the thing that you're really paying the money for and you're trying to get people through is to the very end. So I'm usually an obsessive about looking at all the steps in the journey and saying, in what way can we make it more likely that someone will take the next step? And it could be a change in script. It could be clear information about what happens next and where to go. It could be something that conveys a little bit more confidence that the experience is going to be a warm and welcoming one. I mean, I did some work with Lululemon. I don't know if you know Lululemon. They're sportswear brand, very, very yoga focused, and I spent a fun year with them in Vancouver in 2017. But we put a yoga space. They took over this beautiful building on Fifth Avenue in New York, and they made it into the USA flagship store. But they had this little balcony, and it was very hard to put any merchandise there because they didn't think people would be going. And we said, wait, what an opportunity for a meditation space, a mindful space. So we created some digital audio of key people that, some people within the company, and then other people outside, so kind of like known voices in the space of yoga and mindfulness. And we created this beautiful area. But again, we looked at, how many people came in the store, how many people went into the space, how many people touched the kiosk and put the headphones on, how many people listened to a full audio and then gave us a review, or and some of it was done through observation, some of it was done through data. And then when we looked at it, we were like, how can we get more people up the stairs? How can we get more people to, and it could be conversation had at the fitting room saying, by the way, did you know? We even looked at which bit of the shopping journey was the best point to tell people about it, because we didn't want to stop them from buying. Similarly, maybe once they bought, they'd be on the way out. Similarly, we actually found that one of the biggest barriers to sitting with your eyes closed and the headset on is that people felt very vulnerable because suddenly they shut the world out. And if they had possessions and belongings with them, they didn't want anyone to kind of just come up and take them away while they were sitting with their eyes closed. It seems a really obvious thing. So we created lockers, and it was just a really interesting experiment in that kind of service space. But yeah, it's the approach I take is looking at every step and then saying, if the end goal is the thing that we're doing this for, how can you minimize the drop at each point? And I would literally rattle through each of the themes that I've, the lenses that I think through, and say there's an opportunity here, here, and here. And we'd come up with probably too many ideas to implement, and then pick the best ones, experiment, measure again, and then try again.
Thank
I'm not
you.
sure that's the question.
No, that's really, really helpful. And I appreciate it's more service design, that the area, your expertise. It's interesting hearing you say that. And in terms of how do you drive someone through the customer experience, and it just makes me think of nudge theory as well, and that whole space around what can you be doing to make it easier or to encourage the individual so that they do go through the end-to-end journey. No, thank you.
That's okay. Yeah, I mean, many ways. Say from making the initial thing seem appealing and emotional, the reasons why somebody may want to continue the thing. I remember years ago, say when I worked in leisure, on a notice board, 2 side-by-side adverts for a weight loss program. One was local authority led, built in clip art, referred to disease and percentage risks. Another one was from Slimming World, and it was a picture of a young girl being pushed on a swing by her mum, and the caption just said, "My mum's way more fun since she started going to Slimming World." And it's just even those kinds of those pointers, showing that other people like to do the same thing. So demonstrating demand, showing other people enjoying the thing. I'm not sure. Were you in Woodford Green? Was it yourself? As I say, the British queuing behaviour is absolute. Has got behavioural science all over it. Like we join a queue before we even know what it is, just in case we lose our place. We melt into a puddle of anxiety if we think we're in the wrong queue. For anyone who's not in the UK, a lineup or whatever, I don't know, we call it different things, but still, yeah, the Brits love to queue. So kind of opportunities for visible demand, seeing other people enjoy the thing is big for us too. Couple of thoughts that spring to mind.
Thank you. Great question, Niluka, and thank you for that super answer, Denise. And the book is, I'll tell you all, there's a lot of chat how to actually get the book, Denise. So we'll address the practical side of it in a minute, but I will tell everyone, I mean, it's funny as well. There's little bits that Denise drops in, like, I'm just going to see if we can, the big did you know, like you get all over every book, did you know? But Denise's comment on this is, interesting fact, there's never been anything remotely interesting shared in a did you know statement. So, I mean, it's comedic, it's very light-hearted, and you almost are learning by accident, I'd say. This is the style. You feel like, other people could pick this book up and suddenly they'd know a lot of things about behavioural science and biases by mistake, which is a fantastic way to learn. And I particularly liked this section at the end, Denise. You've got a page on common knowledge. so important. It's heading up here. Everyone knows that, and then lists out all these things that you think everyone knows. But what if customers don't already know it? And this need for repeating basic information, Denise. And as we do always say to people, oh, did you not know that?
Yeah.
Did you not know that? I mean, I hear myself saying that to people all the time. And is that a problem in design, in design in general, Denise?
Oh, absolutely. We make so many assumptions about not only what customers know in advance, but that they know what's happening, and then they know where they're at, and they're comfortable with what they know. And quite often customers have no idea. You might hear somebody say, oh, you know, I went to see the consultant, and then they'd say, and what happens next? Oh, well, wait, no, hang on, there, no, I know, I think I've got to ring them back in 2 weeks, or is it they're going to write me a letter? Even that kind of knowledge. But there's a little snippet in there. There's a couple of Easter eggs for myself in there. And I think on that page, there's an example of everyone knows you need to pack a bike well when you travel with it. Actually, my first international race, European Under-23s, 1999, my bike arrived in Italy bent because I hadn't packed it properly. And everyone said, did you not know you should have put spacers in the front forks? Did you not know? And I said, no, I've never traveled with a bike before. Unfortunately, they were able to fix it. What they said is, don't worry, Denise, we've got a special tool that will allow us to fix the forks, but it's at the hotel. Just give us half an hour, go and sit in the corner. And it took me years to realise the tool didn't exist, but they'd kept me out of the way because they did some really horrible things to my bike to get it back into shape, and they were worried that I wouldn't ride it if I had seen them manipulating it. So yeah, that I learned from bitter experience what happens when you don't know the bleeding obvious, you know.
And Renusha is bringing up an interesting subject that I think probably Kathleen could get quite passionate about after having recommended Invisible Women to me. Renusha has said here about cockpit design. She says, do you think cockpits are more designed for males than for females? I'm sure Kathleen could join us here now and get quite passionate about nothing being designed for females, basically. But would you like to elaborate a little bit on that, Denise? Sorry, Renusha said she remembered reading something about NASA delaying a mission because they had some issues with spacesuit design choices for females.
Yeah, you know what? Probably. I remember all of our aircrew were men. I don't think I remember working with a single female aircrew. And at the time, I didn't really think anything about it. I guess it was the norm. But the one thing that I did remember the most, though, was that we had a very kind of distorted user group in that they were all like 6 foot plus. They were just these really big, tall, like tree trunk type guys because they weren't allowed to fly fast jet when they were in their flying careers. So we kind of, I remember thinking that was very weird that we were deliberately only designing for a narrow group. I hadn't really thought about it from a female point of view. But I do know also that we were designing to, within a certain range of the population, we were saying we wanted, you know, up to, I don't know, whatever, the percentiles, low and high, on things like body mass and sitting eye height and reach and so on. And I guess the lower end of those might have excluded some of our female crew because our requirements were probably based on a data set of male aircrew from like the 1970s or something. So yeah, probably great question. We probably designed terribly for women. At the Commonwealth Games in 2002, the day before I raced, I was driving around with our team manager, North Manchester, I want to say Rochdale, looking for somebody who had, they basically promised that they could fix my skin suit, my racing suit, literally with a day's notice because it had been designed with a long body in it for a man. And it meant that it was baggy in the middle and the cushion in the seat stuck out at the back. And I was worried it would get caught on the saddle as I got out of the saddle. We literally the day before running around Rochdale trying to get a seamstress or a sportswear company to fix it for me. So yeah, bad design for women.
So yeah, if you want to read it, yeah, Niluka, yes, certainly, Invisible Women. If you want to read anything about how the world is designed for men, and without getting too political, we've got Jane Cunningham joining us later in June, on the 26th of June, and Jane is the author of Brandsplaining, which is obviously a play on mansplaining, all about how advertising historically has been designed by men. So yeah, we won't dwell too much on that. This isn't a political discussion here today. So just to wrap it up there, Denise, let's talk about availability of the book. What's the best way to go about ordering your book?
Yeah, good question. So when you mentioned before about the publisher, I'm self-published, so I'm the publisher as well as the author, it's been a bit of a journey. I've been learning a lot about the book sector. If you're UK based, the best place, unfortunately, it's ironic, I've got a bit in the book about how some companies make it so easy for you to buy, and it's Amazon. So I'm a bit indifferent to Amazon. I know how good and efficient they are. They've been very efficient throughout, and anyone who orders through Amazon can get it next day. I know there's been some issues with distribution through Waterstones though, partly I think because they are in a bit of chaos as they get opened out, but unfortunately their system is also the same as Foyles and Hatchard's. They're kind of one big company. So I know there are still people waiting. It was listed on Book Depository, which I know is kind of a vehicle for anybody outside of the UK, because they have free worldwide delivery, which is appealing, and it's not currently available outside of the UK. It shows unavailable right now.
Yeah, that's the reason Amazon India shows it is unavailable. That's the reason even I was looking for a Kindle version. I was like, I won't even go for the aesthetics. I'll just read the book even on Kindle, though the book is so lovely, and I'm definitely going to buy it the time it is going to be available here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm going to look for more avenues. I'll consider a digital version as well. I just need to get my brain around the initial kind of distribution hurdles. I know that people who've ordered... Sorry.
One part of these digital books is I'll say this is also based on behavior. Let's say I decided that, okay, I want to read Dennis' book, and if I have Kindle, I'll just go over it, make the payment, buy it. If I'll have to wait for the book, I might not end up reading your book at all, because we all are lazy.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I think there's some people even right now who are getting a surprise when they get the book because they forgot they ordered it, because they pre-ordered it maybe a month ago. I don't know, have you ever sent yourself a letter? One of these things where you send yourself like a goal 6 months later or something like that. Have you ever been on one of those workshops and you've handwritten your own envelope and you get a letter with your own writing on it? It's a very out-of-body experience because you can't remember. Yeah, so I think some people are getting a surprise, hopefully a really nice surprise, as they get the book. I will probably be making it available directly from my own website very soon with a worldwide delivery option too. Obviously I'm trying to kickstart all the algorithms that you get by publishing kind of through the main channels first. Yeah, if you're in the UK, Amazon and Waterstones online is the easiest. Amazon's probably the quickest. Although I love bookstores, I'm a total fan of books, and I love being in bookstores. So I want to support Waterstones, and that's how I won't say don't. I think they'll get their act together. And yeah, I'll make it available too, because I know that there's people worldwide, maybe not like hundreds of thousands, but you know, there are enough people asking me about it at the moment, and I need to make that available. And I will consider a digital version too. I need it to be.
Thanks, Hector.
Sure.
Sorry?
Thanks, Hector. Thanks, Denise. Well, we're getting close to the hour. And so I just want to wrap up there by thanking you all for joining us again. Thank you for your really interesting insights today, Denise. Very wide-ranging, from your professional experience, the book, your sports experience. So it's been very diverse today. And as I say, we're delighted to have you all join us. Always pleased to see you join us on a Saturday. And just before I hand back to Prakash to sign off for us, I'll just tell you that next week we're going to be joined by Steve Wendell, who is the head of behavioural science for Morningstar. I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation with him. They primarily help people take control of their money, but I think we could just talk about anything about behavioural science with Steve. So it should be a really interesting conversation. So I hope you'll all join us next week. And I'll just hand over to Prakash to sign off the meeting.
Thank you so much, Louise. Everyone who joined in, thanks a lot. Please order a copy of the book. The fantastic thing about this particular book here, Desire Code, is the layout is quite different, right? I know it's easy to just order on Kindle. 2 minutes later, you're reading the books, but there's a certain joy to actually holding a physical book in your hand, and a lovely one. Look at the design of the book. And I think what I'm feeling, I'm waiting for my own copy. I think I'm going to remember this book a lot more because of the nature of the book, the way the book has been organized. So I think most of us will be able to retain this book for a really long time. It's going to make those neurons fire big time, for sure. Denise, thanks a lot for being with us. Any parting words, suggestions before you leave?
No, only have fun with it. I think the book was produced with fun in mind. And, behavioral insight is fascinating, but it can be made really fun. So enjoy it and continue to enjoy dipping into behavioral science as you do, make it fun. So thank you. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you so much for everyone. Please stay safe, mask up, and we'll see you next time soon. Bye.
See you again.